Hello, everyone. Welcome to Their Journey, a sit down with the National Digest. I'm your host, Eric Mastrota, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Janet Smith Warfield once again in a new series where we'll be diving deep into topics, lessons, and philosophies that Dr. Warfield has spent her life learning, expanding on, and sharing with the world through her foundation, Planetary Peace, Power, and Prosperity. If you haven't already, I strongly urge you to check out our previous series with Dr. Warfield before embarking on these upcoming parts, where we'll not only be expanding even further on what we previously learned, but get to ask viewer submitted questions based on our previous conversations as well. Hi, Dr. Warfield. How are you doing today?
I'm laughing, Eric, because that was going to be one of my answers to one of your questions.
Well,
And
perfect.
today I'm fine. I can keep it short, but there are times when, we're all conditioned to ask that question to
Right.
one another. And there are times when I go off course and I will say something like, I've stopped answering that question. I'm just trying to stay sane in an insane world right now,
Mhm.
which means staying centered, aware, and making right choices as I go along. And then I don't know what you would say to that, but
Mm.
all people will respond, "Oh, I get it." Or they'll laugh and say, "Oh, that's a good one. I'll have to use that one too."
Mhm.
So, um, and you never know how the conversation is going to flow. It depends on who you're speaking with.
Definitely. Well, that kind of perfectly brings me to what I wanted to start with our conversation today, because something that I loved from our previous series together that we talked about was language and communication a lot. And I loved how you described language as both a tool for connection, but then also a source of separation, depending on the context. So, how do you guide individuals to use language as a bridge for healing rather than a barrier that reinforces certain divisions?
Where do we start with this one? Um, let, if I may, let me show you rather than tell you
Hmm.
the difference between language that separates and divides and language that brings people together.
Hmm.
Eric, you are such a stupid fool. What's wrong with you? Why don't you listen to me? How do you feel when I do that?
Upset. Yeah.
That's the kind of language that separates
Right.
people, the kind that projects out there and calls people names and orders them around.
Hmm.
Lots of experience with that. Usually not doing it myself,
Right.
but experiencing it from other people on occasion. Um, People who haven't mastered their own emotions.
Hmm.
And that takes a lot of inner work. Um, so I wanted to start this out, if I may, with something that's a little bit off topic to
Hmm.
surprise you.
Mhm.
um, there's a concept called logos. Are you familiar with that? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I forgot to turn my phone off. Let me get rid of that noise in the background. Sorry. Oh, too much stuff flying in right now. Um, and it's also another word used for the same dynamic or concept is the word.
Hmm.
And the meaning of those two words are the hidden order of the universe, the law governing change. It's beneath our words. It's the principle connecting all things. And it keeps showing up throughout history, beginning with Heraclitus in 500 BCE. And then it moves through several other individuals, the Stoics, Galileo, the Gospel of St. John in the New Testament, and the last ones that I'm familiar with are Alfred Korzybski, the Polish semanticist who is now deceased, but he's famous for the words, the map is not the territory, and I elaborate on that. The words are not the experience. The menu is not the food you eat. And the other person is the philosopher Ludwig Witt, Witt, Wittgenstein. I hope I pronounced that correctly. It's German, I think, around 1953. So, and beyond all that. So beneath these words that we human beings have created over time in different locations, in different cultures, there is this concept of an underlying energy or spirit, or you can call it the eternal Tao or God or Allah or whatever word you want to apply to this. And of course, the formal words now are logos and the word. There's so many words out there. And the challenge is that we all use them differently. We don't connect the words to the underlying experiences. So I just want to, begin with that and just be aware that maybe there's something beyond what our minds and our words are able to capture. So, all right, in terms of using words, and words by themselves separate, divide, and categorize. Right and wrong, high and low, dark and light, good and evil. Yeah. And it's really easy to see ourselves as being good, righteous ones, and somebody else as being the evil person. And then we point fingers out there, and that's how we separate and divide ourselves from one another. But we could also use words to connect. And for me, it's all about creativity, personal creativity. This is inner work or inner beingness, personal creativity, and also curiosity. For example, if I want to know more about Eric Mastrota, I'm not going to call you names. I'm going to say, hey, Eric, maybe I will say to you, how are you doing today?
Yeah.
And you can tell me how you're doing, unless you don't want to do it on the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Or I might say, if I've met you for the first time at an event, for example, I might say, well, hello, Eric, how are you? Where are you from? Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Right.
Or I might look at your name and say, Mastrota. Is that Spanish or Italian? What are the roots of that? South American? I'd be interested in hearing you give me more information so I can get to know you a little bit better. And I don't know whether I've mentioned this before on the show or not, but I had a really interesting experience at the local Unitarian Universalist Church in Sarasota. Did I talk about this before or not? I don't know.
I don't believe so. I don't think you did. No, I don't believe so.
After the service, there was a woman sitting alone on a bench there, and I was looking for a place to sit down because I can't stand too long anymore in the shade, because I also have skin cancer and I need to stay out of the sun. And there was this bench with this woman sitting on it. I didn't know her at all, but I sat down next to her. I said, may I sit next to you? And she said, sure. And we all had name tags on. So I looked at her name tag, and it was just the first name. It was Katra, Katra. And I said, oh, that's an interesting name. is that of Slavic origin. And then she began telling me about the background of her name. It was, I think, some Russian roots, some Eastern European roots.
Mhm.
And then she looked at my name, which I usually put the whole thing on because there's a long story behind my name,
Right.
which was Dr. Janet Smith Warfield. And she said, I think I know you.
Mm.
Real. How does this happen?
Right.
She pulls out her cell phone. She goes flipping through her cell phone and she finds something from 2016 that apparently I said or wrote someplace, somewhere, I don't know where.
Right.
And this is in 2026, we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
And she says, you sent me this in 2016 and it changed my life and I've been sharing it with everyone else.
Wow.
She also had on there I can't even remember what it was, some kind of a podcast I'd done or something. I can't even remember now what it was. I've done so many, but I said, have you watched that one yet? And she said, no. I said, well, make sure you do if you're interested in learning more about me. So, to me, it's certainly a synchronicity. It's
Mm.
almost like a miracle happening coming into your life. Um, I can give you other examples. Well, and I think we're going to get into this in the next question,
Mhm.
but you have to do the inner work,
Right.
which means you're answering the question, who am I on this? Let's think of it as a stage of life. I think that's from William Shakespeare. All the world's a stage and the people, the players they're on,
Mhm.
they have their entrances and their exits. What is it from? As You Like It? I don't remember. But I'm pretty sure it's William Shakespeare. But who are you?
Right.
And what is your role to play right here, right now? Obviously, Eric Mastrada's role. Did I pronounce your name right or not?
Yeah.
Okay, good. um, Eric Mastrada's role is to interview me right now, and I'm the interviewee. But
Right.
that can change. When we end this podcast, I'm sure Eric will not. Well, maybe he will be interviewing somebody else. I don't know, or maybe he'll be going back and writing some of his own ideas down in a journal, which is a really good practice to do if you want to answer that question: who am I? Right
Mm.
here, right now, and it changes.
Mm.
So you've got to be aware of your inner resources at any particular moment in time. You have to be aware of where you are, the people around you, what you need, what other people may need, and then serve in the way, whatever way you are able to serve with who you are
Right.
right here, right now. Another thing that I often do. Well, I don't think of myself as a guy.
Mm.
I I simply am who I am right now. I've lived a long, long life, and I've been playing with words for about 60 years now. So I've answered that question to my own satisfaction.
Right.
So I know what I will do and what I won't do and how I will use words in a particular dynamic. But um, see, what happens depends both not on me, not only on me, but on the other individual with whom I'm interacting or not at the time. I mean, I have a daughter-in-law who I walked into their home for a short visit. and it felt like ice in there.
Mm.
And I can't remember. Oh, I think I said, is something wrong? Because I could feel that right in the room.
Okay.
And as I recall, she stormed out of the room, slammed the bedroom door, and wouldn't talk to me.
Mm.
And I thought, well, what did I do? What
Mm.
did I do? What is the dynamic of what's going on here? And I still really don't have an answer to that question, except that I know she lived a very difficult childhood because her father fathered her, then divorced her mother, and didn't want to have anything to do with her when she was a child. Talk about trauma.
Mm.
So, and she desperately wanted to build a relationship with that father, with her real father, and she couldn't do it. She
Mm.
couldn't do it. So this, there's the phrase, the sins of the fathers are visited on the children. I think that there's a lot of truth in that. Let me see if there's, oh, when I go out in the community, I wear purse. I don't know whether you call this guiding or whether you call them hooks,
Mm.
which is a marketing term. But for example, I don't know whether you can see this or not, but I've got our
Oh,
logo
yeah.
and just planetary peace power or planetary peace power prosperity on this t-shirt. And I also have a little cap that I put on. I've got a few of these things. And sometimes somebody will notice and they'll say, oh, that's interesting. Are you kidding me? Do you think that's really possible?
Mm.
And yeah, sometimes it feels like mission impossible. But if they're interested, if they kind of are curious and ask me questions, I can say, I know how to do this. It's a semantic solution to all the human created suffering on our planet, which we can create and often do create from words and what we believe. Let me see. Our minds are flying around all the time. I don't know whether yours is, but mine does a lot.
Yeah.
And if you watch your mind, which is a Buddhist practice, and then just watch your mind. Your mind's flying all over the place, and your mind will direct your actions, uh, your choices in life. And what do you do with this mind that's flying around? And how can you use it
Mm.
and direct both your actions and your speech in ways that are going to bring people together rather than put them in this kind of dynamic or this kind of dynamic. And I think I've done this here before, maybe probably with the power with dynamic where each person is an individual, but and they're kind of dancing or playing a game together back and forth. But there's not this power over you've got to do it my way
Right.
or I'm going to kill you.
Mm.
There's this stuff. It shifts into a power dynamic. And if I've done this, I'll just repeat it. You stop the motion, you have the Christian symbol for prayer, the symbol for namaste. But you see, lots of times if people notice this on my t-shirt or my cap and they ask about it, that starts an exchange of information.
Mm-hmm.
Get that word form. Um, because we create form with our words. And we create form sometimes through our emotions become the charge sometimes. And it can either separate people
Mm.
or it can bring them together. And you're not gonna be able to do that dynamic until you are bringing people together,
Right.
until you know who you are and what you're here to do and how you're here to serve and
Mm,
what your role is right here, right now, and changing.
right.
Um, you know, let me see. I'm just looking at my cliff, some of my cliff notes here. Uh, oh, the other thing, I always, Lord, got that one time again. I have this little folder that I bought when I lived in Panama, which is wonderful. It's a lot less odorous than a pocketbook,
Mm,
and but it carries all my necessary cards, driver's license, and credit cards and all that kind of stuff in this one little container. A lot easier than carrying a pocketbook or a satchel or something. But it also has a little place in here where I can put bookmarks. And I'm always wearing this. We're focused here on the foundation pretty much.
yeah.
But it just has, and that logo is wrong. There's a long story behind that.
Mm,
The correct logo is the one behind there. That's the better logo anyway. Um, and then on the back, it just gives our website and it says a semantic solution to all the human created suffering on the planet. That's all. And
mm,
I don't give it to anybody who doesn't read books, but I may, if somebody notices the, um, on this side, notices the logo
mhm,
and the words and asks about it, then I ask them a question. I said, "Do you read books, physical books?" If
mhm,
they say yes, I just say, "Would you like free bookmarks?"
mhm.
And usually they'll say, "Oh yeah, thank you so much, very much." This is this kind of dynamic instead of this kind of dynamic or this kind of dynamic. Um, Usually they'll say yes, and so I give them to. If they say no, I don't give them a bookmark.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, let me see if there's anything else. I that I think I'm done with that question. Let
Yeah. Yeah.
any other place you want to take it.
Well, yeah, no,
Or
you
I'm
kind of
too much on your lap at one time.
no, well, you kind of perfectly led me into the next one when you're talking about how it's really important to make sure you're doing the inner work first before you can have that communication and open communication, especially because something I loved from our previous series is when you mentioned these four questions that are really important to propose to yourself when you're doing that inner work. The what do I think? What do I feel? What do I need? And what are my choices? These are really powerful questions to ask yourself when trying to do some self-awareness. So, what would you maybe say to someone who is struggling to kind of answer those questions in themselves, either like you mentioned, due to maybe past trauma or just a general disconnection from their inner self from not doing that work for so long with themselves?
We're all trained to look out there instead of looking in here. But
Mm,
this is where the answers lie.
yeah,
And if you don't ask yourself, if you don't use first person singular
yeah,
and ask yourself these questions, you are not going to find them out there from somebody else, including you're not going to find them from me.
right.
But I can um, give you use words to give you pointers of places to look or questions to ask.
Mm,
But I can't give you the answers. That's something each person has to do for themselves. Now, there are two more questions
mm,
that came to me later. Those were the first four when I was in chaos, mental, emotional, not so much physical chaos, but I was really struggling personally. And somehow, I don't know where I got those questions from. Maybe they just came into my head. But then I started really focusing on them and answering them. There are people who don't even know that they have choices in each and every moment, but we all do. There's some of them are not easy. I can tell you tons of stories about those. Um, but the other two questions that I added later on
Hmm.
were, what do I need to know? And that's reading and studying and talking to other people, asking other people. And whom can I trust?
Hmm.
Because there's some people who just want to use you and then discard you. Use you, abuse you, and discard you. And that hurts.
Yeah.
When if you trust somebody who is not trustworthy, you're going to get hurt. So you need to know where to set your boundaries. I mean, I can tell you, did I ever tell you the story of when I was getting gas at the gas station? I don't recall.
I'm not sure. Honestly, no. Yeah. No.
You see, telling stories are powerful too.
Yeah.
Um, there's certain kinds of language that bring people together, and then there are other kinds that really separate them apart. I was pulling into a local gas station here in Sarasota just to fill up my gas tank. And I was just in the process of positioning my car so that the tube would actually reach the tank that I wanted to fill. And this guy, I think maybe he was about 30, 50 years old, maybe give or take, some in a fancy sports car, comes flying into the gas station. He says, "Get out of my way."
Hmm.
Well, I didn't have to do that. Had I not been in a car, believe me, I would have gotten out of his way because he could have killed me.
Hmm.
But instead, I stood my ground. I
Hmm.
just stayed where I was, and he kept shouting, "Move, move, get out of my way."
Hmm.
And I just sat there, and I guess finally he figured it out that I wasn't going to move. I was going to stand my ground. So he pulls around real fast to the other side of the gas tank. He's still spitting words out at me,
Hmm.
ugly words, nasty words. And I just remained silent. Believe me, I kept my windows up. I had the protection of the car, and it was positioned so he couldn't get in there to fill his gas tank. Uh, and then I decided to roll my window down just about halfway.
Hmm.
And I said, "Do you have no respect for women?"
Hmm.
And he shut up.
Hmm.
I did not get out of that car. I did not get out and begin filling my gas tank until he left, because God knows what he would have done. He was in such an angry, ugly state. So, yeah, there's lots of tools you can use to do this inner work. I
Right.
mean, asking yourself those questions are really powerful tools. I have discovered for me personally. And the answers are going to be different depending on the unique person that you are. Nobody can answer the questions but you. But I think you said you journaled. Some people don't know how to journal.
Yeah.
Journaling is a powerful tool.
Yeah.
You just write that question. What do I think? And it's always right here, right now. I
Right.
mean, you can plan ahead if you want. You can look back at your history or your her story if you want. But it's really just writing down whatever matters to you most right now, or just watching the thoughts. When when you journal your current thoughts, what do I think? They're going down on paper, so you can go back and look at them from the outside later and think more about them. So what do I think? What do I feel?
Hmm.
And I've certainly been through a lot of trauma in my own life. I mean, if you go onto our website and you look at our mission statement, it's moving out of fear and terror, moving out of rage, out of fear and terror, and toward standing your ground or being courageous or moving forward on your own life path. It can be whatever you decide. It's the rage is interesting because it transforms into, I think, moral action, which is respecting yourself and respecting others. And because we're each an individual, that it's not always easy because sometimes you don't really like what somebody else is doing. And at what point do you say, I really wish you would stop doing that. It's bothering me. Mm. Or at what point, or do you just let it go and either leave the room yourself or just be quiet and go on with your own life? There are lots of choices there. But, terror and rage and shame, not feeling good enough because someone has told you you're no good. You're a boy. I'm going to whip you. I'm going to beat you with my belt. That's this stuff. And it's very traumatic for children to have to go through that kind of treatment as a child. And there are more on there. You can expand. You start with the individual. Each individual has to do the inner. But if every individual would do the inner work, and bring inner peace, because this is the end result. You bring inner peace, personal empowerment, and a sense of abundance or prosperity. Having enough, being grateful for what you do have in your own life. And if everyone were able to do that, it would be planetary. And there's an overall rule that you can use, or guideline, let's call it a guideline, you can use, which is very useful. It's not perfect, but it's a really good guideline. Do whatever you want as long as you do no harm. Mm-hmm. You can also think of it as do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Yes. Have I told you the story of the two little boys in my backyard or not?
Yeah.
Okay, I won't repeat that. I don't remember which podcast it was in, but if anybody's actually, let me just summarize it if I can real fast here, because maybe some people don't have time to go back and listen to all the podcasts. But I was a young mother. My oldest son and some of these friends were out in the backyard. I was at the kitchen sink hand washing dishes at that point, but I was keeping an eye on what was going on in the backyard. And I began hearing these two little friends of my son's starting to call each other names. You know, it's this, you're rotten, you're no good, you're whatever. Focusing out there on what the other person is doing wrong, not the conscious space in which you need to do. So I went out, made my presence known. And of course that shifts the dynamic because, oh my God, here's an adult coming out. Is she going to scold us or what is she going to do? You know, more trouble. Mm-hmm. But they stopped calling each other names. But to shift that I pulled each of them aside separately, and I asked each of them the same question. Mm-hmm. Do you want to fight? No, fight, but he's making you. Mm-hmm. They both said the same thing. So then I brought them back together again. And I said, well, if you want to fight, go ahead and do it. They both told me they didn't want to fight. And they're kind of they still don't trust each other because the other one was calling them names, but they kind of shuffle their feet and they look at the ground. And you see, the focus shifted from what the other person was doing wrong
Mm,
to what they wanted to do or didn't want to do.
right.
And so they kind of looked down at the ground, shuffled their feet, looked at each other out of the corners of their eyes, and 2 minutes later they're fighting happily together. This is the kind of shift that can happen when you refocus on what you want
Mm,
rather than looking out there and blaming somebody else for creating misery.
mm.
I think I'm probably done with that question unless you want to.
No, yeah, yeah, because I love how you're talking a lot about choice too, and something you also have said to me before that I really loved is how us as humans we're just in a constant state of choice. And we actually have a written in question from Jonathan from North Carolina who asked, "How can I better recognize and reclaim my power of choice when I feel trapped by external circumstances, internal conditioning, and like we were talking about, past trauma and things like that that are hindering that power of choice?"
Ultimately, you have to let go of the past trauma, although that's not easy to do because I've been through that dynamic too. Sometimes you want to release it, but you feel so abused that it's really hard to let go of that hurt. So, well, first of all, you're always in choice.
Right.
You're just always in choice. You may not be aware of the choices you have, but I mean, the simple answer is yes, I'm going to do that, or no, I'm not.
Mm,
Just as simple as that. Now, if you say no and you're around a bully, you may get slapped down physically, and that hurts.
mm,
Um, but you're always in choice. There, one of the hardest choices for me was to learn to say no.
mm,
Um, I don't know whether you're familiar with EST training or a mind spring. They were around years ago,
mm,
and they're very different, but they're kind of both focused on helping you answer that question, who am I?
mm,
And this one is moving out of fear or terror and into standing your ground or strength or courage. That's been the hardest one for me to navigate. But the mind spring training is kind of you're already in this dynamic and you're helping one another, supporting one another. You're kind, you're considerate. The S training was much more in your face
mm,
because you were with people they had 4 requirements for the workshop to go on. Um, I'm not sure I can remember all of them right now. I think it was don't chew gum, be respectful, be on time. The last one was do whatever you're told. That was what really was bothering me because, and I asked questions. I said, from whom are we to take our direction?
mm,
And the answer was the facilitators in the room. And the first workshop, I did, I did what I was told and pretty much kept my mouth shut. The second, but the whole following week, I was tormented because I didn't want to do what they were telling me. But they said, we won't do the workshop unless you agree. So I struggled with it.
right.
And something shifted in me because of that internal struggle. Am I going to say yes or am I going to say no to? And I decided to stay in integrity with who I was. I was going to say no. So we got back at the workshop and they demanded that we agree to all those commitments if the workshop were to continue. And I said, no,
Mm.
I'm not willing to do whatever you tell me to do. At which point they walked out of the room and I was left with screaming participants who had, spent a lot of money to get there and get all this learning and education. And I don't know, maybe had to get babysitters for their kids or whatever. So everybody's screaming at me, but I felt no fear. And in fact, I felt compassion for them almost. I'm really sorry you've got all this rage flowing. Um, but I, I forget how that section worked. I think the facilitators came back into the room and
Mm.
they asked me to leave.
Mm.
Or maybe one facilitator came back and asked me to leave. But I know the reason I went into that workshop was to deal with my fear. When I walked out, all the rest of the facilitators are sitting down on the steps and they're congratulating me and laughing as I leave the workshop. And I got exactly what it was I was looking
Mm. Oh.
for. You have any other questions?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's really important because something that you're emphasizing and that we've talked about, the foundation also emphasizes is relational awareness and the flow of interaction, like you were just discussing. So we have another question from Julia from Colorado who asked, "How can I heal wounds like betrayal or abandonment that I feel are blocking my ability to engage in just genuine, conscious, and compassionate conversations?"
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah,
Boy, have I ever been there myself. So, this is not easy,
yeah,
but you can do it. And I think I need to sort of tell a fairly long story again. And I'm looking at my notes here, but you can change your focus.
mm,
Uh, have you considered letting go of those people who have abandoned you and betrayed your trust? That's really hard if it's something like a parent or a spouse
yeah.
or a child. Um, and the other thing you can do, and this gets into choice again, seeking out people who understand the importance of self-respect, other respect, integrity, and accountability. Who can you trust? Who can you not trust? You don't want to trust people who are going to do this to you or going to kill you with a gun or whatever, make war on you. Um, I don't know whether I've talked about this before, but I have talked about it publicly. I don't know whether I've done it here. But the father of my children and I were involved in a group marriage for about 7 years. Have I talked about that here or not?
No, I don't believe so. Yeah.
God help us. And we had originally made vows to one another to love, honor, and obey until death do us part. And we had a functional, but not a sexually intimate marriage. And I was blaming myself for that.
Mm.
Um, I guess I wasn't pretty enough or I wasn't sexy enough or whatever. Born into a female body. So I will say it was, oh, we were good friends with another couple with whom my husband worked. We lived in separate houses. We each had 3 children. And the other guy read a book called The Harriet Experiment by a gentleman named Robert Rimmer. And
Mm.
it was about group marriage. And he said, this is really pretty interesting. And then we all read it and we talked about it. And this is in the 60s. And it was quite interesting. I mean, the theory behind it was when you are in an intimate relationship with another person, you will experience different aspects of yourself.
Mm.
Well, that to me is always interesting. Who am I? I think I know who I am, but that's in this context. And I did feel, and even all through high school, boys would never ask me out because I was smart, but I probably wasn't an easy score
Mm.
sexually. So, they didn't want to borrow my homework, but they didn't want to ask me out. My mother was really pushing me to get married,
Mm.
or else I'd be an old maid sitting in a lab someplace, and she wouldn't have the grandchildren that she wanted to have. It's very complex.
Mm.
But we decided we were going to play with it. So we talked about it for a good 9 months. And then we decided, well, let's explore and see if this is true that in a relationship with an intimate relationship with another human being, that you learn different things about yourself, who you are. You go deeper into who you are and the aspects of who you are. So we exchanged partners one night, and my husband and the other woman had sex, and the other guy and I did not. And I told him I was sexually frigid, and he wasn't pushy at all. He respected that. But eventually, my relationship with the other man developed in the Kama Sutra related sexual relationship. I don't know whether you know what that is, but it's where you just, oh my gosh, you feel totally at one with this other person. Um, the group marriage ultimately exploded. It
Mm.
worked fine when we had our own legal homes and legal marriages, and we were just exchanging partners at night in the same house. But then the other man got a job out in California, and we were in New Jersey. And then I was ready to let the group marriage go, but the other woman and the father of my children were not, maybe because it wasn't their choice.
Mm.
It wasn't them that were going out to California. Well, the other guy, he picked up and left with his legal wife and children.
Mm.
But we all really miss the deep energy and the human dynamics of that group marriage, even though sometimes it felt like a roller coaster. There's a lot of other detail I could go into, and I think I'm not going to do it here. But if anybody is interested in learning more, you can go read my book, Surrendering in the Soul: A Heroine's Journey, because that was my heroine's journey, and it was like being on an emotional roller coaster. Either you were way up here or you were down in the dumps. And sometimes it was only one person who was down at the bottom and everybody else was so high up here. I, you learn a lot about yourself and about human dynamics when you get involved in that kind of a relationship. But I was done with it because I mean, I'll just give a few details. We missed one another. So, in such major ways. When they were out in California, we were in New Jersey in the same way. The father of my children. There was such longing and such uh, happiness almost that. And then the other guy got a job back in New Jersey, another job, and couldn't decide whether to move back or not. And thought, well, if you move back, we'll all at least be physically in the same location again, and maybe we should consider legal divorce, either not no fault divorce, remarriage, and keep the group marriage together. Well, then when I lived with the other guy, my Dr. Jekyll became a Mr. Hyde. He was screaming at me. He was smashing glasses into the wall. And he was abusing my children. And he broke people. Mm. So I had to get out. As good as our sexual relationship had been, I could not live with this man. And the other woman at one point said, oh, yeah, he used to do that with me, too. Maybe why she wanted to get out of the marriage or wanted to get involved in a different relationship. I ended up in a homeless shelter for 5 days. And when my parents bailed me out and were able to buy a home where at least I had a roof over my head, and I had to go back into the job market. This was probably the beginning of the 1970s, because I'd been staying home taking care of home and family. Right. And I didn't have any money of my own. I got a job initially at $1.60 an hour. I had to count my pennies before I could buy a quart of milk. And that was when I decided to go to law school. Because, and you know, there weren't a lot of women practicing law at that point in time. So yeah, I went to law school. I knew I would have to get really good marks to even get a job when I got out of law school, but I graduated cum laude and I did get it. Well, just many, many threads going on here. And that's, oh, let me just mention one more thing. Because this gets back to the question that was asked by Julia. Because I tried and tried to forgive the father of my children, who at that point was legally married to the other woman. We were the kids were going back and forth between his house and my house. But the way this evolved out is that I was, at that point I had the money to support all my grandchildren's education. So I was making gifts to them to help them pay for their college. But I never got invited to their graduation. I never got invited to their marriages, to the two that are currently married. The other woman was invited because they loved their grandfather. And they hated me because they saw something I said somewhere and nobody seems to know what it was. And when I was writing, I guess, about what had happened between the man who made vows to me and me when the other couple was out in California, and he wasn't present. He was just missing her so much, and she was sending him daily love letters, which I tolerated for the sake of the group marriage. This gets really complex, but it's also why I think I am now the founder of Planetary Peace, Power, and Prosperity, because I've been through all this hell. Getting back to the question here, I try to, after I had to get out of the group marriage and got thrown into a homeless shelter, and then finally at least had a roof over my head thanks to my parents and a place where my kids could sleep and I could care for them and cook and had to go out and get a job at the same time. Um, I, I would go out late at night after the children were asleep and I would drive by the other houses. At that point, the other man had another girlfriend sleeping with him. And um, at that point, I would drive by the home that I had put so much of my own time and energy and love into that used to be mine.
Mm.
And I would hear the man who had made vows to me and to whom I had made vows laughing and talking with the other woman in the basement of the home that I had put my own heart and soul into. I wanted them one of them, but I didn't because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in prison or get executed for murder, and because I didn't want my children to be born.
Mm.
So, but I can't tell you how many times I tried to forgive them and I couldn't do it because this was so traumatic for me.
Mm.
And I was so hurt and angry. I think, what did I do wrong? I didn't do anything wrong. I
Mm.
was supporting them the entire way. And I was the one who paid the price for that. But it also strengthened me. Um, but it felt like a poison in my heart and I couldn't get rid of it. I can't tell you how many times I tried. I went through all kinds of training and mentorship and everything and, ropes courses and bending a steel rebar using only your necks running toward another person. And you make a commitment before you do that. And my commitment was always forgive them.
Mm.
But the poison was still there. Um, the traumatic part for me, the really sad, and this is all about human dynamics. And some of this stuff it goes back to this whole concept of logos, where we aren't controlling what's going on, but there is a pattern that our minds can see or that we can live, we can be at some point in our lives. But our middle son, the of the man who made vows to me, I think it was, I can't remember what it was, but his father wanted to have his cake and eat it too. He really liked having one woman take care of his home. Well, another woman was always available for sex anytime he wanted it. And he could go out sailing, which was his passion.
Mm.
Um, and there was an incident where my trust was really betrayed. Uh, and that's in the book. I'm not going to go into that here. But our middle son, his father at that point was throwing him down on the ground and pinning him down there and slapping him around. So his father was doing this to his own son. And the other man was screaming at my son because his son, uh, my son was, from his perspective, he was teasing the other little boy, and the other little boy got mad. So his father started screaming at my son. That's, but, um, and he went through such terrible trauma as a result of this group marriage. He was brilliant. He got good marks. He dropped out of school. He started hanging out with a gang of boys where he learned how to smoke, fight, steal, and do drugs just to survive because he was so traumatized. And at one point, he threatened to commit suicide. Um, he lived such a hard and traumatic life. The sins of the fathers are visited on the children. Thou shalt not commit adultery. And he didn't deserve that kind of life.
Mm.
I did what I could to support him, but when he was also stealing from me and others of our survivors, friends were, um, this middle son died on November 19th, 2022, when he was 59 years old. After his little Uber car, at that point, he stopped the drugs, he stopped the smoking, he had his own little business, and he was loved and well liked by the people who he picked up at the Knoxville airport. But he was hit head on by a drunk driver on the wrong side of Pellissippi Parkway, which is a divided highway near Knoxville, Tennessee. And he died about a day and a half later in the emergency room in the hospital. There was another car just to his right, driving by at 100 miles an hour with no seatbelt on. That guy was dead at the scene. And Steve's passenger in the back seat of his Uber car. She lived, but she had $500,000 of medical expenses, and I think $100,000 of insurance or something. So, at Steve's memorial service, I invited his father. I did not invite the other. At a point, one way, it was just a small family gathering. I had the opportunity to pull the father of my children aside for just a brief conversation. I wished him a belated 65th wedding anniversary. He nodded his head. Then this was the incident that traumatized me within the group marriage. And again, I'm leaving out a lot of details, but I was sobbing in the back seat of our car while the man who had made vows to me and fathered our children was so deep in conversation with the other woman that he didn't even notice my sobbing. And it was a point where the four adults had gone to Washington, D.C., and we left the children with their parents, with their grandparents. And I had told my parents we would be back at a particular time. And we weren't, because I was ready to go back. The other man was ready to go back. But the father of my children and the other woman were still having great sex and a great relationship in the motel room. I had no money, and there wasn't anything I could do to check. I said, why don't we go knock on the door and get them out so we can be accountable to our parents for the children. And the other man said, oh, give them a little time. There was nothing I could do. I wasn't driving. I had no money. I had to just put up with it. But anyway, at the interment of Steve's ashes, the second thing I said to the father of my children was, what you did that day felt like a poison arrow shot right into my heart. Mm. He didn't say anything. That's why the forgiveness was so fun, because that poison was within me. That pain, that hurt over the betrayal and the abandonment is what it felt like. So he didn't say anything when I said that. It felt like a poison arrow shot right into my heart. But then he began talking about the other woman to whom he'd been married now for, I guess, 30 years or something. The fact that she had had to have two hip replacements, could hardly walk, and he had wanted to move into an assisted living community where she would have more support, but they couldn't sell their home and do it. And I was able to listen compassionately. You know, they had lived a hard life too. And I just wished him well in his life path. And we went in different directions. So now I'm the founder of Planetary Peace, Power, and Prosperity. And he's doing whatever he's doing. As far as I know, they're both still alive. They're in Florida. But I don't, you know, I don't talk to them. They have gone in their direction. And I have gone in mine alone. But not alone. Like, I'm just, right now, we have a new member on our board of directors. He's a very interesting gentleman. His name is Bob Hopkins. And he's all about philanthropy. I don't even know what philanthropy is or not, but it's basically a giving and receiving dynamic, and of course, this is the infinity symbol.
Yeah.
The members of the board of directors, are in the process of meeting physically.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking, I haven't met two of them. I've never met two of them physically, but I'm in conversation with them all the time. We're going to meet physically at a little intentional community in Flat Rock, North Carolina in July. We're going to physically be together. And my best guess is it's going to be a very, very interesting dynamic. I'm just trying to pull all the threads of that one together. Now, the logistical pieces, the reserving the cottage and the figuring out who's coming in when and whether there are enough beds and all the rest of that stuff. So, but you see, I know you over felt betrayed or abandoned after that short conversation.
Yeah.
And I could let go and move and do what I've been given to do and allow him to follow the path that he has to follow.
Yeah.
Anything else? That's a lot, but I haven't even given you all the details of that.
No, well, thank you for sharing that though too, because it leads us into our next question about like those moments and being present in those moments. We have a question from Jessica from Long Island that I really, really love about remaining in the present moment. She asks, how do I cultivate presence in my interactions, particularly in moments of conflict or emotional intensity, which kind of relates back to that story that you just told a little bit with remaining.
See, you need to stay sane in an insane world. You need to. This is the inner work. As I say, I felt like killing them both because I had been felt so abandoned and traumatized, and I couldn't release it on my own. But I didn't take the action that thought came into my mind, but I didn't take the action to actually do anything about it because for a lot of reasons, partly it's not who I am. It would put me out of integrity with myself as painful as it was. But the other reason is I knew if I did it, my children would be orphans, and I did not want that. Assuming that I was executed for murder, I didn't want to spend the rest of my time in prison again because I would lose that relationship, my ability to be a mother to my children. And, I didn't do it because the alternative and the other consequences were um, things I didn't want. I didn't want my kids to be orphans. I didn't want to spend my life in prison
Hmm.
because I had better things to do with my own time and the life I have been given to live. So, yeah. So, Jessica, how do I cultivate presence in their interactions? This is the question we're on. It is, isn't that the question five? Okay. This question is very confusing to me, and I'm wondering if the focus is just totally wrong. Yeah, how do I cultivate presence in their interactions, particularly in moments of conflict or emotional intensity? What really, in those words, in that question, the words that caught my attention were, well, how do I cultivate presence in their interactions?
And I have in my interaction, so maybe there was a typo in the
Oh,
version I
I'm
sent
sorry, say
over.
it again.
I have for me, how do I cultivate presence in my interaction? So maybe there was a typo in the version that I sent you.
Oh,
But I have, yeah,
that changes the whole dynamic and then changes my answer to the
mhm.
question. Presence in my interaction. So but I would still have a lot of questions about this question, even if it's, all right, let me change that. Because it changes the whole context of the question and how it might be answered. Um, well, first of all, if this, I mean, is she talking about conflict between her and another person, or
Yeah,
emotion,
my
or
my
or is she talking about, for example, she is in a room where two other people are fighting?
Yeah, I don't know. I take it more as just like when you're in conflict with another or a group of people, how do you not let your mind wander to maybe the past and why you're so upset or why they're so angry and just stay in that moment to make sure you are communicating properly with that other person or group of people to get your point
Don't even
across.
try. I think I'd go sit and do some journaling. Uh, again, to get my own head straight and to stay away from the conflict, to
Yeah.
get myself out of the conflict. You don't need, if it's someone else bashing her in some way,
Yeah.
like this, or if they're in this kind of a dynamic, you can't, when you're in those dynamics, you can't get here.
Hmm.
So you've got to separate from that person or that dynamic so you can stay sane. Um, I guess I was, again, was a typo in the question that changes the whole context too, because I'm thinking, what is she asking here? What I'm visualizing then is, is she talking about being present in a room where two other people are fighting, and, is she asking, how can I change this? Or how can I stay centered while two other people are fighting around me? That was the way I was understanding that question. It goes to show, too, how differently each of us interprets the same words. The words are what they are, unless you make a typo. But the underlying dynamic could be very different. There's so much depth beneath a lot of these questions from my perspective that they aren't answered easily without really understanding the person
Right.
and what they are going through with a lot of detail and a lot of specifics. I mean, even you and I, even when you correct your typo, even you and I are understanding the question differently. And you're understanding it as how she stays centered when it sounds as if you're understanding it as being in a dynamic like this or like this or like this.
Yeah.
How she doesn't.
Yeah.
You get out of that dynamic whether you have to physically remove yourself or just go in your own room, lock the door, and start journaling, or do a vision board or something else. Write some affirmations. These are all verbal tools you can use to shift your own feelings about yourself. Let me see. Yeah, that question was just really confusing to me. Um,
Yeah.
what am I missing? Hmm.
Let's move on to I want to close off here with something about talking about how, something that you've emphasized and that your foundation emphasizes is this community model with emphasizing dynamic relationships that are nonlinear also. So, how would you go about or recommend going about creating a safe and supportive environment where, one can heal collectively while leaning on each other, while also honoring the fact that we're all unique and we all are on our own unique path and have our own individuality?
Yeah, there are. Well, I think it feels to me as if I am now in communities that are doing that. You have to go through all those 6 questions for yourself. But I think it could be. I think it's possible. I know it's possible. I think it's going to happen when all the members of our board of directors, plus the daughter of one of them, is
Hmm.
going to gather together in this little intentional community in Flat Rock, North Carolina, in July. Each one of us has a skill that nobody else has.
Right.
Each one of us has lived a life path that nobody else has lived. And the community itself is very supportive and interesting. The people who live there,
Hmm.
um, like just to give an example, there's a sign now that says 7 miles an hour, children and critters playing. That's the energy of that little community. So the land matters, and the people who are on the land matter. There are peacocks there, some of them just roaming around free. There are goats and sheep in the pasture, which I can see from my little front and back porch, whatever, of my own little cottage there.
Hmm.
The people are very interesting. Um, there's a guy who worked out in, I think it was in Michigan for a long time, who had an uplift community where he taught children to respect themselves and respect one another.
Hmm.
And he had a vibrant little educational community. So the people matter, the land matters. They do things like they have little, I think it's once a week. I haven't been up there for a while, but where they have, you come out to a garden area and there's free coffee there. There are organic vegetables that are grown right there that are for sale if you want to buy some at very reasonable prices. You have an opportunity to sit down with whomever you want and start a conversation. So this is possible, and it is being done right now in many places all around the world. We may not hear about them, but there are places like Auroville, for example, in India, where they have ashrams and a really fascinating little community. I've been there, but I was only there for a day. Um, Trying to remember the name. There's a place in, I think it's in northern Italy, which is built inside a mountain. But they do amazing things in that little community as well. Dancing, they create beautiful structures. Even when you look at some of the medieval churches, you think of the time and the energy and the effort that
Mm,
went into creating this magnificent art and sanctuaries in which you felt safe. And, yes, there were certain rituals. I think if everyone who wanted to be part of a community, the word covenant has come up for me recently, which is you agree that you are going to do unto others as you would have others do unto you if you want to live on that land.
mhm,
And you give what you are able to give. And then you are open to receiving the gifts that others have to give back to you. So you're supporting one another. You're in a dynamic flow. Um, and it doesn't always, there are glitches in it that happen. And then you just have to stay centered in who you are,
mhm.
even in the hard times, in the challenging times. Um, this idea of it's a commitment that you make. And if you can't keep the commitment anymore, then you leave the community.
Mhm.
It's kind of related to the whole idea of excommunication. And notice that word communication, excommunicate. You drop people out of the conversation
Mm,
and you drop them out of the community. Um, Kind of goes back to what I was beginning with, which is this whole concept of logos, or the word, the hidden order of the universe, the law governing change, the principle connecting all things. But we are important players.
mhm,
So if we get ourselves centered in inner peace, because this is what the result is, inner peace, personal empowerment, and what that looks like. The inner peace probably is what happened after I had the opportunity, after the father of my children told me what was going on in his life with the woman that I wanted to kill at one point in my life. Things changed. The dynamic changed.
mm,
And I wish I could remember the name of that place. Anyway, I have never been there. I've been to Auroville. I've never been to the place in northern Italy.
mhm,
But I've seen videos of it, and it's just absolutely amazing. As are some of the videos from Auroville. This is possible. It is being done. There's another place. It's started by a friend of mine, Laura George, called the Oracle Institute. She has created her organization is the founding mothers movement, not the founding fathers movement. And she has property, which she calls the Oracle Institute, and she has created there a peace pentagon, not a war pentagon, or not a defense pentagon, a peace pentagon. And she uses a structure called, she uses a lot anyway, called sociocracy, which is a method for deciding who decides. That's a whole conversation in itself, which I'm giving you kind of tips of the iceberg, I think, throughout this. There's a lot of depth you can go into. And there are a lot of books out there that can give you support and give you new ways of moving forward. But the bottom line is each one of us has to build our own connections. I think of it as a connection with a power greater than yourself. Maybe it's a connection with this universe or this God. It's energetic, it's dynamic, and we want to stop the motion and get it now. We want to get the results, but that's not the way it works because it's infinite. It goes
Hmm.
forever and ever. Um, and even this whole idea of doing no harm. Every time we eat a meal, we kill something just to be able to sustain our own bodies, whether it's meat or whether it's a plant or whatever it is. So and that's probably the origin of the Christian ritual of saying grace before. I mean, thank you for this food that you have given to me.
Right. Right.
It's it's a fascinating place, and you get to decide who you are right there, right now,
Yeah.
and your own role. You know, how are you going to play?
Hmm. Definitely. Beautiful. Well, Dr. Warfield, thank you so, so much for all of that and for taking the time to speak with me and kicking off this next series of episodes with us at Their Journey. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's interesting for me too. It's funny. I put together all these cliff notes. I think about your questions ahead of time, and I'm thinking, okay, you look at the logo behind me. Which direction, which
I gotta
word
go.
direction are we going to take this conversation? And there's so many choices out there.
Yeah.
Uh, you've got to start paying attention to the options available to you
Mm.
because you don't have to stay in being the power under person here.
Right.
Choose to move out. And that may be hard too. I mean, you're faced with some hard moral choices as you go along your own life path.
Yeah.
And only you can answer them unless, I guess, you're somehow driven or you're gifted with a connection with this energetic spirit flow, whatever name you want to do.
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you so much again. And for everyone, at home, if you want to check out our previous series of episodes with Dr. Warfield and our articles with her, you can click the links in the description. And once again, I'm Eric Mastrota, and this has been Their Journey, a sit down with the National Digest. Take care, everybody.